this week's Torah portion, of course, is Tavo.
Oh,
Yes.
he told them to present their first fruits to the priesthood in the temple and to say.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when they came back to Israel, the temple wasn't built.
No.
So that's confusing.
Okay. You're talking about the very first, verse there?
Yeah, he told them to present their first fruits to the priesthood in the temple.
Okay.
Well, how many years after they came into Israel did all that? It didn't happen at once, the temple.
Nope, it happened. It happened during David's time because, and I believe it's 1 Kings. It makes note that that God wanted a permanent place for him to rest, because with the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the presence of Hashem, the presence of God was, with it whenever it is that it went, being that of the Shekinah, the divine presence of God. And so there's a story in the Talmud about why it is that God chose Jerusalem to build the temple. And the story is that what happened was that there were these two brothers. One was very wealthy and the other was very poor. The one that was very wealthy did not have any children. The one who was poor had many children. And so what happened is one of them goes and says, my brother, I feel so bad for him. He doesn't have any children. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take part of my field, of the crops in my field, and I am going to go and put them in his field, so that he will amass more wealth and, to be able to be a happy individual, because of the fact that he doesn't have any children. The rich brother said the exact same thing and did the exact same thing, and they went into each other's fields every single night, until one day they ended up meeting, right there in the middle of the night, and they knew what the other one was doing, and they ended up crying and embracing one another. And the story in the Talmud goes that this is where it is that God chose to put the Holy Temple, because of that spirit of love for one another was the place where it is that God wanted his presence to rest. Yeah, but you're right. They make note here about the Holy Temple in the first part here. It says, the name of the Torah portion, Ki Tavo, where you enter. Moses told the children of Israel that after entering the land of Israel, they were offered the first fruits of their produce to the Lord as an expression of gratitude for redemption. He told them to present their first fruits of the priesthood in the temple and say, I will declare this day to the Lord my God, and I enter the land in which the Lord swore to my father to give us. The formal declaration included a recitation of the story of the redemption from Egypt. The entire ceremony alludes to the final redemption. Okay, so, the thing with that is that many people look at the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. It is considered a Mishnah. And for those who don't know what that word is, the word Mishnah means it repeats. It repeats all the things we find in the first 4 books of the Bible.
It's not called oral tradition.
Yeah, so it's very much a part of that, just showing another side of it, because as you know, in the Talmud we have the Mishnah, we have the Gemara, we have the Tanya, and so on and so forth. And so, the Mishnah means, a repetition. Okay. Is essentially what it means. And so with that, we also got to realize that the book of Deuteronomy, some scholars say it was written by Moses, but the issue is that it records Moses' death. So that may not necessarily be the case. Most scholars, however, say that the book of Deuteronomy was written hundreds of years after the death of Moses. So therefore, it's very possible that God had given this commandment for this to be done in preparation for the Holy Temple, And so, it's one of those things. Does that help at all?
Yeah, I just I was looking at the time frame, just, you know, so.
Oh yeah, and they could have very well. And I didn't bring my chumash with me, right? Today I was running out the door, and I meant to bring my chumash, and one of the days I should have brought it because I would have looked at the Hebrew and said if it was talking about in relation to the Mishkan or the Bayis HaMikdash. Because different translations will translate them differently, and so that's why it's always good to go back to the Hebrew. So, anything from those who got to read it this week? We have a newcomer today, and we're glad that you're here and all that stuff. Excellent. And
my name's Joe.
Yeah.
Simpson.
What's your name?
Linda,
Yeah.
Where do you go to church at?
First Presbyterian.
You're more than you.
Huh?
Where do you go?
I don't go anywhere right now. I used to go to Summit up in town, Summit.
Yeah.
Summit.
I
Where
go
is
to
that?
Mount Home Baptist.
My husband had a lot of relatives that went there, the Dales. And,
Oh, cool deal. Cool deal. So yeah, so basically what we do every week is we kind of go over the Torah portion. Those who don't have the books, I go and I make the printouts for them for the next week, and they get to study them and all that stuff before they come in. So I'm sorry you might feel a little bit behind
I was
today.
listening tonight.
Excellent. And if you have anything that that jumps out at you, feel free.
Correct.
Excellent. So.
this mentioning of the first fruits after the Messiah,
Mm-hmm.
the followers of Jesus, that was interesting, saying the first fruits of the Master's ministry.
Absolutely.
And it's continued to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Grown.
Yep. And a lot of those, there's certain times of the year where these things come to fruition. Like for instance, I believe it was in, it's actually in verse 2. I actually did a studio teaching on this yesterday, as a matter of fact, in terms of verse 2. The whole thing with the basket and all that stuff. This is done during the day of Sukkot,
Yeah.
Which is an 8-day festival that will be coming about the end of next month, if I remember correctly, is when Sukkot happens. Yeah. Does it have the festivals in here?
I don't know.
Let's see here. We'll find.
Where did you get the calendar?
I get it. I take Israel's Eretz magazine. It's like the National Geographic over there, and they send me a calendar.
I got one time from Zola Levitt.
Oh yeah.
And I gave it to the mayor, Mel Coyne.
Yeah.
It was a real good calendar. It had all the holy
Did
days,
it not say?
feast.
Yep, it sure does.
I hope he looked at it. I don't know whether he ever did or not.
Yeah, it says that Sukkot happens on the 5th of October, as a matter of fact. Not
Week or two. Saturday. Either Saturday, Friday night, or Saturday, Friday night.
Yeah. Well, it's on a Thursday, it says.
Oh, Thursday.
Yeah. The thing is, okay, I'll have to look up something in terms of that later on. All right, but yeah, and so one of the things that is also done during this time when the basket is presented is, I remember several years ago, a lady that I was engaged to ended up passing away from cancer, and what ended up happening was that I ended up having to go not only bring my basket to Sukkot, but also one for her as well. And those, if you've lost somebody who's close to you, during that time you go and you present that to them, so they get counted for that mitzvah, during that time as well. And so the reason for presenting the basket is a giving of oneself to the Jewish community that is gathered during Sukkot. And what they do is they take all those, they gather them up, and they cook the meals and all that stuff for everybody who is there. And it's basically to help people as soon as Yom Kippur ends and Sukkot starts, we, start this new transition in life, because of the fact that we have just gone through the Day of Atonement. We've, asked for God to forgive us of everything that we have done the past year that may not have been so good. And we ask people for forgiveness that we may not have treated so well that for the past year as well. And that's why Rosh Hashanah, which is, in just a couple of weeks here, is called the head of the year. It's the Jewish New Year for individuals. And we have 4 Jewish New Years, and that seems confusing to a lot of people. And the reason why we have 4 is because of the fact that, that was considered the day that it is that man was created. And so that was our New Year. And then, of course, the earth was made on a different day. So we had the first of Nisan for that day. We have the day in which, the trees and all that stuff were made. We have Tu B'Shavat for that, and so on. So it's kind of, almost like a birthday of parts of creation is essentially how it is. And so, after Yom Kippur, and all that stuff, we turn over a new leaf. And so one of the first things we do is we give to tzedakah. We give to charity towards one another and all that stuff. And so that's what the whole idea with the basket is. And now First Fruits of Zion says in terms of that, in the days of the temple, farmers in the land of Israel set aside the first fruits of wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. When the farmer went into the field, the vineyard, the orchard, or the olive grove, he took note of which produce was the first to blossom and ripen into market by tying a ribbon around the stem. When these first fruits matured enough for the harvest, he brought a basket into the temple of Jerusalem, usually the festival of Shavuot. They also do it during that time as well, which is known as Pentecost as well. He presented the first fruits to the priesthood, reciting the liturgical declaration prescribed in Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 5 through 11. The commandment to give the first fruits of produce of the Lord reminded him that the land belonged to God, and all things come from God's hand by returning the very first portion of his bounty to the Lord. He showed his gratitude to God for God's provision and blessing. The same principles apply to the commandments regarding the firstborns. So,
Okay, what would they do with that fruit, the priests?
it would go to
The poor, or would they eat it, or?
it would actually be going to both.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely, because that also marks, well, not necessarily a New Year during Shavuot, but this is when, every so many years there is like, something goes to that of the Chohen, of the priest, then to the widows and the orphans, and there's rotating years in terms of that. Different sects of Judaism have different rotating years in terms of that. So if anybody asks me what year we're on now, I could not tell you, because first of all, we don't have a holy temple. There's no holy temple right now. So, this is one of the things that cannot be really fulfilled at this time. So it's fulfilled in other ways. But this makes note of Messiah, as it says in the next little part here. The apostles considered the first generations of Yeshua's followers as first fruits of the Master's ministry. Much of the pilgrims ascended to the festival of Shavuot with baskets of first fruits to present before the Lord. The followers of Yeshua gathered in the temple for Shavuot in Acts 2, the very first fruits of Messiah's ministry. On that day, the first fruits of the Master's ministry received the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, and thousands were added to their number. This was the first fruits of the harvest of Yeshua's work, but they were hardly the last fruits. We are still reaping a great harvest. This can be compared to the prophet Hosea, refers to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in Hosea chapter 9, verse 10. The Lord says, I saw the forefathers as the earliest fruits of the fig tree of the first season, as we see in Hosea 9:10. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were the first fruits of our faith. They were the first believers. Similarly, the apostles and early disciples were the first fruits of messianic faith. Paul referred to the Corinthian household of Stephanas as the first fruits of Achia, which were among the first believers to confess Yeshua in Corinth. Yep. Go ahead.
Let me ask you one thing,
Mhm.
before we get on, Hosea, where do I find that?
It's in your Old Testament.
And under the what it says prophets, where
It's a minor prophet.
Yeah.
the minor prophets, okay?
Yep. Yep. I think the book of Hosea is like maybe what, 4 chapters maybe? Remember correctly?
No, I think
It's a very small book, just like
it's
the.
very
I
small.
thought it was a wonderful book,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. A lot of good stuff in there.
So
Okay.
this goes to about 12, 13,
Oh, really?
yeah,
Yep,
14 chapters in it.
I was a little bit off there. There we
Well,
go.
that's
Yeah.
not very much.
They all small books.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, compared to,
They're powerful though.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
They are.
Well, I'll look that up.
Yeah, so let's see. Oh, yeah, you're fine. Let's see. Employing the metaphor in a common direction, Paul wrote that Messiah has been risen from the dead, the first fruits of those who were asleep, as we see in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 20. He explains, so also in Messiah, all will be made alive, but each in his own order. Messiah is the first fruits after those who are Messiahs at his coming, as we see in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 22 through 23. This means that Paul likened the entire resurrection of the dead to the great harvest of human beings. Although Messiah is not the first ever to raise from the dead, he was the first to raise to the immortal state. Therefore, he is the first ripening of the fruit, who will put the mortal flesh and put on immortality. Later in the chapter, Paul continues with the horticultural imagery of the resurrection. He says, that which you sow does not come to life unless it dies. That which you sow, you do not sow the body which is to be, but bear grain perhaps of wheat or of something else. But God gives it a body, just as he wished to each his own seeds of the body of his own. So in conclusion, it says, the master also used the germination of sprouting of a grain as a simile for the resurrection of the dead. In John chapter 12, verse 24, Yeshua prepares his disciples for his death and resurrection by saying, truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls onto the earth that it dies, it remains by itself alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit.
I like that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
it says.
Now, one of the things that may have jumped out at you guys in terms of that, it says that Yeshua wasn't the first.
I got that right here,
That's
I
what
got
it
my
said.
paper.
That's one of the-
But he
Who
was
was-
the first to never die again.
Exactly,
Who-
exactly.
what-
So who was, considering that they say that he wasn't the first to do it in a mortal state, who was the first?
To be resurrected.
Yeah.
Well, Moses died, but.
You mean in the New Testament?
No, I'm talking all the way back in, I'll give you guys a hint, the
Was
book
it-
of Genesis.
Who's the one that comes from
Well, Samuel was
Ezekiel? No, not Ezekiel.
resurrected, but his spirit was, but
Okay, here's one of the things. Now, we see many times in the New Testament that the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. We don't see anywhere in the literal of the Old Testament this concept of resurrection of the dead, do we? It doesn't say anywhere that, a person's going to come, he's going to, the Messiah's going to come, he's going to rise from the dead and all this stuff. So, this was an idea that was already within Judaism, but it wasn't seen by the Sadducees. The Sadducees also didn't believe in angels, they didn't believe in a Messiah at all. Because these weren't things that were in the plain literal meaning of the text. How often do you hear people say, when you try to make a point, show me in the plain literal meaning of the text? That's kind of the Sadducean doctrine. The Pharisees, however, as we see in chapter 15 or 20, Paul says, that the Pharisees believed in the resurrection of the dead. The Sadducees didn't, and Oh, you're fine. You're fine. But the thing with that is that with the story of Isaac being taken to the Akedah, when he was, God told Abraham to go and sacrifice his son. There is a story in the Talmud in terms of that, because it makes note that after Sarah dies, Isaac's nowhere to be found. Now it says in the story that, that God, basically stalked Abraham and all that stuff, and Isaac lived. But this question pops up: why is Isaac not there? Because if somebody's mother had passed away, you would think, that he would be there. So the rabbis go and talk about this, and they're arguing back and forth. And one of them comes to the conclusion: the first time we ever see this idea of resurrection of the dead, because they say that for an instant that Isaac's soul left his body and then came back and he was reanimated again. And this is where the core concept comes from. And then it's built on from the story of Elijah and so on and so forth. And this is how it is formulated within that, of being this Pharisaic doctrine that we would have a Messiah that would be resurrected from the dead. Now, the Sadducees didn't see this, because the Sadducees, again, they only took things for the literal. When the Torah says an eye for an eye, they actually literally thought it was an eye for an eye. You got to pluck out the eyes of these individuals, and Hasher Shalom, that's not the way that it was supposed to be, So.
Well, like what happened to Ishmael. Now the Muslims tell you that Isaac took Ishmael over there and then brought him back when he was older.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's a very good question. And in all honesty, I cannot say that I can adequately answer that question, because I have not.
Jews ignore it, and Muslims ignore Isaac.
Let me tell you something about
Yes, sir.
I can't put my finger on the verse in Hebrews, but
Mm-hmm.
when Abraham took Isaac up on the mountain and sacrificed him,
Yeah.
in God's eyes, he was as good as dead for 3 days.
Yeah.
From the time God told him to take Isaac, and it took a 3-day journey,
Mm-hmm.
he was as good as dead.
Absolutely.
And when he got up on the mountain, and God stopped the knife from plunging into his heart, it's like you said, it was like he was resurrected. And then, excuse me, and in Hebrews,
Mhm.
it's talking about it, and I've read it many times. It tells about he was received up as a figure of the resurrection,
Mhm.
in so many words. And when they left, when Abraham and Isaac left the mountain and went down, he took men with him and left them at the foot of the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in chapter 22 of Genesis. It says Abraham returned. It don't say a thing about Isaac. And the next time Isaac is seen is when he's meeting his bride.
Very interesting, isn't it?
Picture of
Yeah.
the church and Jesus meeting
Yep.
his bride.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You hit the hammer on the head perfectly there.
I wish
Absolutely.
I could find that verse in Hebrews, because it just clarifies it all.
Oh, absolutely.
And
And
when Abraham, before they went up to the mountain, he told whoever was that with him, he said, me and the lad is going to worship and
Yeah.
we'll be back.
Oh, yeah.
He
Yeah.
said it will be bad, so,
absolutely.
Uh-huh.
So-
Abraham knew.
Yeah, so even in his words over there was kind of this prophetical thing that
Oh,
was kind of
yeah,
being
yeah.
said in many ways.
Yeah.
And see, and here's the thing that is just so amazing to me is, let's see, Linda, have you gotten to the Dalit yet?
No,
Or the Gimel? I'm thinking of the Gimel.
yeah.
You've gotten to the Gimel. What is the gematria value for the Gimel?
What's the what?
the gematria value.
Oh, don't ask me. It's high.
No, the Gimel's only 3.
Oh, is it on it?
Okay.
This
I
one?
found it.
Oh, you found it? Oh, go,
read to you.
go right ahead.
In Hebrews 11,
I'm thinking of the shed.
17. By faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promise offered up his only begotten son. See, he was considered,
But not the first
not
one.
the he was considered his promise seed,
Mhm.
not Ishmael, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. He's talking about Isaac.
Yep,
He received him in a figure as from being raised from the dead.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Isaac
That's
was
cool.
not a child though.
Nope.
At the sacrifice, he was an adult.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
was. Yep,
Did
absolutely.
he
Lost
turn
God.
against his father?
Who, Isaac
Uh-huh.
turned against Abraham?
You don't hear about him until he gets married.
No, that's a picture of, that's because he's a picture of the church, and Christ went back to the Father, and the next time you see him is when he meets his bride.
Exactly.
When Rebecca, when Eliezer is bringing the bride to him, and she jumps off of her camel, and they meet each other, and they're meeting in the field.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And it's this picture of the rapture.
Oh, now
Hallelujah.
we're going to disagree on that, but you know.
That's a perfect picture of it.
Oh,
It's a
goodness.
perfect picture.
That is something.
Oh, goodness. But yeah, you know, one of the things, you know, you make note of the 3 days and all that
I
stuff.
didn't get that. I'll skip.
Oh, it's
I
oh
don't
no,
mean to
not
get
at
you
all.
sidetracked.
Oh, it's no,
That's okay.
no. It's a good thing because it all comes full circle. Now we see, you know, this number 3 that is used often, you know, especially with dealing with the resurrection of the dead, you know, and all this other stuff. Now it's just amazing to me how it is that many, you know, in Orthodox Judaism, and you know, especially, you know, those who have ever read the Der Chaim, which is the commentary on Pirkei Avos, which is a tractate in the Talmud. We have the Maharal of Prague, who was the greatest rabbi of the 16th century, write this commentary. And he's making note of Pirkei Avos, chapter 1, verse 1, which is part of the Oral Torah. And in Pirkei Avos, chapter 1, verse 1, it says, the Torah was received at Sinai. It was transmitted to Moses, from Moses to Joshua, from Joshua to the elders of the Great Assembly, and they said 3 things. Be diligent in judgment, develop many disciples, and build a fence around the Torah. And so the Maharal's looking at this, and he says, why does it say that it's, you know, they said 3 things? We can count those for ourselves. It doesn't need to say that. But there's a reason why it says it. And the Maharal puts this into perfect, you know, to not see Messiah in this, you know, in Jewish thought is just, you know, it just bewilders me that people don't see it. Because he says a complete entity is made up of 3 parts. He says no more is needed and no less is adequate. And so he goes and he makes note, he skips the whole thing of, you know, the 3 parts of God, but he does go and talk about how one part is an opposite extreme through perception of the other part, and that there's an intermediary that binds the 2 together. Okay. Now the thing that really jumped out at me is that in the writings of the Zohar, it makes note that the middle pillar of the Sephirot, which we've talked about the Sephirot before, is the Son of Hashem, is the Son of God. And so when I look at this, you see the Father, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, and you see these things that almost seem contradictory. You have the fatherly aspect of God, and Ruach HaKodesh, in Hebrew and Aramaic, there is no neuter gender. Okay, every verb and or noun and everything has to be either masculine or feminine. So there's no it. And in the book of, I think it's the book of Romans, in the Aramaic it says, she, the Ruach HaKodesh, brings comfort. And all these attributes of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, are feminine attributes. Wisdom, comfort, and all these things. And so we see these, what seems to be opposite extremes from one another. The fatherly aspect, and then, comfort and all these other things that are, that are feminine. And then right in the middle you have the thing that binds the two together, which is the Son of God, the Messiah, Yeshua. And so, with this, he's going through all these things, talking about 3 kinds of Torah law, Mishpatim, mitzvos, and Chokim law. He makes note of that. He makes note of the 3 founders of our faith, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so on and so forth. And I'm sitting up there going, is God not a complete entity? Is God not, complete? So therefore, outside of this number of 3, it's considering that even when we recite the Shema every morning and every night, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Eloheinu, Hashem Echad, Baruch Shem Kevo, Baruch Tov Le'elam Vayet, we mention God 3 times in that, and say Echad as opposed to Yachid. Okay, now Echad means unified. It's a unified one. Yachid is an absolute one. So isn't it interesting that we say Echad as opposed to Yachid when we mention God 3 times in the Shema? So there's a lot within that number 3. There's a lot within there.
Number 3.
Absolutely. Anybody have anything to add to that, or anything that jumped out at them in this week's Parshas this
The
week?
difference in Mount Zion and Mount Moriah. Where is Mount Zion today? Now, Mount Moriah is where the Temple Mount is.
Uh-huh.
But Mount Zion is where Tabor and Shimon are digging.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was trying to figure out exactly where was it. It's opposite, I think, of the Temple Mount, but I don't know in which direction.
That is a very good question. You know that archaeology and geography are not my strong suits.
I know.
Now there are debates as opposed to where it is, the Mount Zion is, and I'm not going to pretend to be any sort of.
But it's right near there. It's a hill or whatever.
Yeah, and I'm
They're
not.
finding priestly houses on it, and so it's where the priests were wealthy and beyond belief, and all of that. But it's near the Temple Mount, so
Of course.
I've been there, and I've just been racking my brain trying to figure out where it is.
Any of you guys got any insight on that might be helpful? Because in terms of archaeology, I'm an idiot.
I'll have to call Tabor. But no, that jumped out at me.
You know what he's going to end up doing? He's going to end up giving you the Moses map. That it's over here. You got to go this way. And I'm kidding. Yeah.
Charles Worth had a big lecture on
It says right here,
Romans.
although that the name has been assigned to a different hill in Jerusalem today, in biblical times, Mount Zion and Mount Moriah were the same hilltop.
Well, I don't know.
Does it does it give a
That's why I
footnote for that?
questioned
Does it give a footnote for that one?
No, it's just
No.
right up there where it says the farmer brought the first fruits of his produce.
But I know
The
Tabor's
temple.
working on
Okay.
Mount Zion.
And
so.
the ancient name for the Temple Mount is Mount Zion.
Mhm.
Okay.
And the Samaritans called it another thing.
Well, see, also at the same time, Mount Sinai had a couple of different names as well.
Yeah.
So, that's entirely possible. That's entirely possible. Absolutely. And plus, with that as well, there's many names for the Messiah as well that we find, as a matter of fact, at the beginning of every page, we see some of the selected titles for the Messiah, and there's many that you guys know, such as Sar Shalom, Prince of Peace, Yeshua, and Melachim HaMelachim, the King of Kings, so on and so forth. So, that would absolutely make sense. Anything else jump out at you guys this week?
I have this for some reason, let me see.
And some of these things were some of the things that we went over a
Yeah,
couple of
we've
weeks
gone
ago.
over it all.
Yeah, because like, for instance, the curse of the law and how it is that Paul was talking about that. That was something that we covered from looking at Galatians and all that stuff.
Well, it answered a lot of questions when I asked you one other time why the Jewish people were still being, I don't want to say the word tortured or whatever. And it talks about curses on the Jewish people, and it would continue because they sinned and this, that, and the other.
You're talking about under the header, healing every sickness and disease?
Yeah, the curse, under the curse and that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the things of, I believe this is on the passages about generational iniquity, if I remember correctly. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 59 through 61, then the Lord will bring extraordinary plagues upon you and your descendants, even severe lasting plagues, miserable chronic sickness. He will bring back all the disease from Egypt, which you were afraid, and they will cling to you. Also every sickness and every plague that is not written in the book of the Torah, the Lord will bring on you until you are destroyed. And that's from Deuteronomy. They go on to say that when the Lord redeemed Israel from Egypt, he said, I will put none of the diseases on you which I put upon the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer. Moses warned the people, however, if they do not walk according to the commandments of the Torah, the Lord will bring back on you the disease from Egypt, which you were afraid. Also every sickness and every plague. This explains the healing ministry of Yeshua. Messiah brings the antidote for curses. Surely your sickness he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried, as we see in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 4. Yeshua went through the cities and the villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. Matthew chapter 9, verse 35. The miraculous healings of the first fruit of the Messianic era, when the Lord will eradicate disease and sickness. Here's the thing in terms of that. In Matthew chapter 23 as well, we see that Yeshua goes and says to listen to the Parashim, listen to the Pharisees, do as it is that they say, but then he also makes note of the hypocrisy at the same time. He's saying, though it is that our tradition, our ways are these things, you don't lengthen your tefillin to be seen, you don't, extend your zitziot to be seen, you don't look for these, to be sitting at the head of the banquet tables and all this stuff. And this is what these cats were doing. And so there was this hypocrisy that was there. And see, what was it, last month was Tisha B'Av? What is one of the things that that is said within Jewish tradition that is the reason for the destruction of the temple? Baseless hate within our very own Jewish communities. It was our own baseless hate that caused the temple to be destroyed. The thing about it, though, is that the Jewish people are definitely God's chosen people. I converted to Judaism, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that we are the most righteous or the most holy out of them. That's not what it means. Instead, there's a greater responsibility.
Well, are you born Jewish?
Nope, I was a Jewish convert.
Oh.
Yep. So there's this greater responsibility, and that's one of the things that Paul makes note of. He says that the Torah of life can also be the Torah of death. And that's basically, one of the things he was talking to the Galatians who wanted to run before they can walk. It's like, whoa, before you do that, you need to know what you're getting yourself into, And so with that, there's this high standard that is there. There's going to be many different struggles along the way because of the fact that one of the things that Rabbi Shalom Arush, who wrote the Garden of Emunah, the Garden of Faith, he said that that basically that God mollifies his children, as it says in Proverbs, just as a father does his sons. What's the reason for this? Why is it that a parent will go and punish their children? For the reason for them to learn their lesson. We go through struggles in life so that we may gain some wisdom through them, so that it is that hopefully we change our ways. And so certain things that would be afflictions that would cause afflictions to the Jewish community would not cause the same necessarily afflictions to the Gentile community. If that makes any sense. Does that make sense?
Kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question about this,
Yes, ma'am.
where it says under, the man who stand to intercede.
The man that stands.
No, wait a minute. 866, what it talks about,
Okay. What is the header there? Because the books have different pages. The exile.
I'm
Okay.
sorry,
It's okay. It's okay.
What is it, exile?
Yeah, underneath there, it talks
Yeah.
about the Jewish people, nearly, what paragraph?
Page 1044.
Fourth paragraph, I guess, on page.
Okay.
Nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people have wandered, bitterly oppressed and hated and reviled, homeless and helpless, a proverb and a taunt on all the people in hunger, thirst, and the lack of all things scattered from one end of the earth to the other without rest. And I'm thinking about today,
Mm-hmm.
how, because I often, every once in a while, I get a letter about this rabbi saying that they need donations for people in Israel that are suffering hunger, and seem like this is still going on to today.
It does. It does. Always make sure that the things are authentic, though.
I never think of them being without.
Yeah,
But there's
Of course.
poor Jews, and I didn't know, they were poor Jews
Yeah.
over there. Do
Yeah.
you think that's a legitimate thing when they send you for donations for that?
I'd always probably be skeptical about it.
Yeah, because
You probably know about some of the better organizations out there that are reputable and all that stuff. So do you happen to know the name of the organization that sends you these things?
I should have.
I just threw one away the
It's
other
some
day.
rabbi, it's some rabbi.
Yeah, that's,
It's one on TVN, I think, that comes on.
he's on quite often.
Yeah, and they always show pictures of
Yeah.
the elderly in Israel that are poor and that are hungry, starving. And I said, well, why is that going on over there?
I support a couple of Jewish missions,
Yeah.
Chosen People.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're a good one.
And one in Phoenix, Arizona, is called Jewish Voice.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've heard of
With
Jewish boys.
Jonathan Burness.
Yeah.
Now,
He's
he
a good
does
guy.
He does medical missions
Oh,
to
okay.
a lot of the black Jews.
Mhm.
They're full Jews,
Yeah, from
but they're in Ethiopia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they are poor.
And
Oh,
and
okay.
he does a great work.
Yeah.
Oh,
He
yeah.
does. He does a great work. And I've been supporting him for several years. Quite a few years, in fact.
Oh,
So that
wonderful.
makes sense.
Took a long time for them to be accepted.
Yeah.
But due to DNA, they proved it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And this is what, when God said, scatter them to the four corners of the earth.
That's right.
And that's why I have, that's why this Friday, I'm doing a thing on the Facebook Live. I'm doing a 6-week thing on a book from First Fruits Design called 12 Gates. And there is this book that has gotten to be very popular here recently by somebody that wrote it in the 90s by the name of Batya Wooten. And Batya Wooten started the Two-House movement. And the Two-House movement, first of all, is not grounded in Scripture, but it's very popular among new believers because of the fact that they feel that because of the fact that they've come out of their former religious institutions, start to incorporate a little bit of Torah in their life, they think that they're one of the descendants from, the tribes, which is just, it sounds like fairy tale type of stuff, first of all. But second of all, she goes and tries to say that it's all that the lost tribes are all Anglo-Saxons. That's a rather racist.
That's, you know,
Yeah.
you know who advocates that?
Oh, I'm sure there's quite a
The
few.
Worldwide Church of God. You remember Herbert
Yep.
Armstrong?
Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
The
Yep.
cult, if there ever was one.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So, you know, but the thing about it though is that the whole idea of, you know, I have a love for Israel, for the Jewish people. I must be one of the 12 tribes. You know, that appeals to a lot of people,
Yeah,
sadly.
that's,
See, that's the Mormons too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you know, and they believe in that same. A lot of the same stuff comes out of Mormonism, that is within the two-house movement. It's a very destructive because.
it is.
You know, you take, for instance, you know, Paul makes note that when a person starts to come into faith, they start out with these 4 laws, which are, you know, kind of the beginning part of the laws of B'nai Noach, you know, a new convert. You know, and the thing about it, though, is that he talks about this slow progression, you know, so a person can encompass these laws of God, you know, not to, you know, say, hey, you know, you need to come out of the church and stop doing this and stop doing that, you know, and you need to take upon the entire Torah and put upon this, you know, one Torah theology that is horribly destructive. Because if you try and do that to somebody, you know, then basically they are thrust into another world. Man, somebody really needed some paper towels. They're going to be thrust into another world, you know, drowning, essentially. You know, and that's why it is, you know, whenever I talk about, you know, those who are saying that they want to start taking on mitzvahs, you know, I say, you know, you got to do it one at a time, master one at a time, focus in on one. Don't drown yourself, you know. And so people get too zealous for this and they try and run before they can walk, and the next thing you know, they think the earth's flat, you know. That's actually a thing nowadays. I thought that was done, you know, people had discredited that in the 1700s. But however, there's people today that think the earth is flat.
Yep.
I want to ask you another question about,
Yeah.
you know, it says, under the king in exile, it says, at that last paragraph, it says, the Jewish people have been a proverb and a taunt amongst us anti-Semites. In every place they have sojourned throughout the centuries of exile.
That's right.
The world has heaped all manner of bigotry, racial slurs, hateful insults, and mocking invectives on the Jewish people. As Yeshua predicted, you will be hated by all because of my name. Would that be in relation to what's happening now with the nations surrounding Israel?
I think so, definitely. You know, and I think it's also a part of history too. There was a great documentary that was put out by, believe it or not, a Catholic priest. And what was the name of that documentary? He wrote a book first, and then they did a documentary on it. Constantine's Sword was the name of it. Are any of you guys familiar with this book or the documentary? It's very powerful because this Catholic priest, you know, kind of goes through the history of the Crusades. He goes through the Holocaust, the Spanish Inquisition, and all these other things, and sees how this is, all throughout Jewish history, and how there's this anti-Semitism that is an inherent anti-Semitism that I really don't think a person could be held accountable for, in all honesty, considering that it's so ingrained within the culture today. People don't even realize it's there. You have, for instance, there's a guy with really creepy facial hair that is very popular nowadays, a pastor. What's his name? Stone. Perry Stone. He's writing books on how to accumulate wealth like the Jews, And I'm sitting over there going, that's blatantly, stereotypical there, but. It's one of those things that people don't realize.
So why,
some of these things.
Is these countries like Iran and Iraq and all these people trying to kill them? I mean, wipe them out. Why is that? Has something to do with a long time ago?
How about Hitler?
Yeah.
It's a hatred. Satan put hatred in there. They brought forth the Messiah.
Yeah.
And they've been hated ever since. Satan tried to kill the seed before. All the way down through the Old Testament, he tried to kill the seed that would bring forth the Messiah, and he never stopped. He's
It
trying,
just
and then
keeps
now,
on
now
going.
that the seed has come forth and brought forth a nation, he's trying to kill the nation.
Yeah,
He hates Israel,
I know.
and he hates everything to do with the
Everything
Messiah.
about it,
I mean, that's just a fact.
Yeah.
You like
And he works through people in
That's
countries
right.
like
Like
Iran
Iran.
and all them,
Mhm.
and he just, he's alive and well.
Yes, he is.
He's not a figment of nobody's imagination, I'm telling you.
Here's an instance of this. This is a Hebrew word right here for violence.
Violence.
Okay? Now, you guys ready to see what it is when I transliterate it out?
Now, why are you starting over there? Humans.
No,
Hu-
Hamas.
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 Oh, yeah, okay.
So, a lot of these things are, and plus, some scholars say that Amalek, which we talked about, was it last week?
Mhm.
We discussed Amalek?
Amalekites.
Yeah. Amalek represents two things. First of all, represents the Yetzirah, the inner Satan, but also from the physical seed of Amalek, they say that this is Islam.
Oh.
So there's a lot of stuff in their history, in Islam's history, that is debated back and forth. It's when you see stuff like this, and also one of the words for curse is the word Allah, in Hebrew. This is a good indication, and I remember one time I took a New Testament class over at Western Piedmont, and they had this gentleman that claimed up and down because of language, all these gods were the same. There were actually some kids that got up and walked out. Now, as I was learning Aramaic, I saw where he got this from and where the error was, because in Hebrew, the singular form of God is Eloah. Okay, in Aramaic, it's very similar to Allah, but it has a hey in it. It's Allaha. Okay, so you can see how that can drive past somebody's mind real quick. Oh, Allah, that's one of the names in Aramaic for God. No, it's Allah and Allaha. Two different things, not the same. So, yeah.
That's why you need to know Hebrew.
Yep.
I know a little Hebrew and a little Greek.
Oh, whoa, cool.
The little Greek, he runs a restaurant, and the little Hebrew, he runs
A coffee shop.
A coffee shop.
I like that. I'm going to have to remember that. Oh, goodness. Well,
Let's see now, is it?
it's about that time, but if we have anything
Yeah,
else
that's
that
it.
you guys want to touch upon. Next week, Brooke and I are going to be in Virginia, so we're going to take a week off.